I've always loved the idea of the moon gazing hare, but I've never painted one before, so today I'm putting that right. I want to give this illustration a dreamy storybook feel, so I'm going to be using the Inktense paint pans along with fine liner pens on a textured watercolour paper. I've kind of lightly sketched everything out in pencil, and I'm masking out a few areas with masking fluid before I start painting in the background colours. I've designed the layout mostly with prints in mind. It's going to be a 6-inch square, so I can have it printed onto some square greeting cards that are just a little bit larger than the cards I already have available. Ideally, I'd have used some masking tape around the edges, but I don't have any to hand, so I just painted around the outside line with masking fluid. It won't give a perfectly crisp edge, but I don't think that matters so much for this one. I want to create a deep starry sky with lots of texture, so I'm playing around with some blue, turquoise and purple shades. One of the things I love about Inktense is you can use it like watercolour to create a subtle wash, or you can build it up and layer it for some beautiful vibrant colours. I've allowed that to dry off a little bit. Now before I do anything else, I'm going to carefully peel off the masking fluid and see how those edges look. It's coming off quite easily without damaging the surface, so that's a good start. There are a couple of tiny spots on the moon where it wasn't fully covered, but to be honest, I think that'll just add to it, so I'm not going to worry about those. I want to add some scattered autumn leaves in the foreground. I'm never quite sure whether to do the line work or fill in the colour first with Inktense. If I was using watercolour, I'd probably put all the lines in first and then fill in the watercolour, but Inktense can be quite opaque, so it sometimes needs line work drawing over the top. I'm just going to wing it and see how it goes. The leaves are going to be fairly light in colour, so I'm going to try and get all the outlines in first. I might have more line detail later. This is by no means a tutorial, but if you like experimenting with art materials, you're in the right place. These are going to be fly agaric mushrooms, so that'll give me an excuse to try out the cherry red, which I haven't used yet. I could have masked out the white spots with masking fluid, but I'm going to be using something else to paint those on later. I'm using a black fine liner for all the foreground. I could use a bit of grey for some of the details that are further back, but I'm not quite sure how well that'll show up against these colours. I still feel very much like I'm finding my feet with this style of painting, so it's all a bit of an experiment. I used to paint a lot in acrylics, which is very different. If I didn't like something in an acrylic painting, I could just paint over it. That's not really an option here though, which scares me a bit, so I'm taking my time and going slow. I am mostly self-taught, so I tend to play around until I find my own ways of doing things, which is kinda nice because that way you end up with your own unique style. I don't want my illustrations to be a reproduction of anyone else's, even if the subject is similar. By the way, if you'd like to see more painting videos, please do hit the like button and let me know. I also do some doll making and chat about creative stuff in general. So if that sounds like your sort of thing, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I love how bright these colours are. I'll put a link to the paints and pens I use in the description. The Inktense range is all vegan friendly too, which is one of the reasons I chose this over watercolour. I've been vegan for almost 15 years now, so I do my best to avoid any materials with animal pigments in them. I've drawn out the hare in grey ink, mostly to get the details right before I fill in the colour. I'll admit I've been putting this bit off because I convinced myself I was going to mess it up. I always think that, but it usually turns out okay. I do think it's going to need some black lines putting in later though. It's always a bit scary when you start building up the colour. I think every painting goes through an ugly stage before it starts to make sense. You just have to keep working and have faith that it'll look good by the time it's finished. Although I live out in the Welsh countryside, I've never really had a chance to see a hare close up. I see lots of rabbits by the canal, but hares are a bit more secretive. You just usually get a distant glimpse of them bolting across the fields before disappearing into the undergrowth. I want to add in a bit of depth and shadow, so I'm using a little bit of violet purple, which might seem counterintuitive, but it's going to create a nice contrast against the orangey browns, and it'll work, trust me. So we're kind of getting there now. I've still got a bit of background to fill in, but I've started adding some highlights to the hair with white gouache. So while I've got that out, I thought I'd add the white spots to the mushrooms. I'm just dabbing it on with a tiny brush. Now they're starting to look much more like fly agarics. Adding some white highlights to everything just brings it all to life and stops it looking flat. I think white acrylic could work for this too. The Inktense is permanent once it's dry, so it doesn't bleed into the white. I'm hoping to get some prints and greeting cards of this one made soon, so once they're available they'll be linked below the video. If you'd like to see more of my illustration, there's another video on screen now I think you'll enjoy. Go watch that one now and I'll see you next time. Bye!